right, everybody, welcome back to Gridiron Gang, a Detroit News Lions podcast. We're going to be breaking down the Lions 53, 52, 50? Something, 50-something man roster, walk through all the surprising cuts and other big decisions, talk about what happened on the waiver wire, what the practice squad will look like, and dive deep on the 2025 Detroit Lions roster and some moves that still need to be made. Before we get to all that, I'm Nolan Bianchi. With me, as always, is my partner in crime, Richard Silva. Richard, how you doing today?
Well, it's been a busy couple days, and there's still some movement and shaking, it appears, because like you said, they're not at a full 53 yet, and they're not at a full 16 on the practice squad.
Yeah, so first off, we should start with an apology. I think we said when we ended the show last week that we were going to record an episode after the 53-man roster was announced. We decided rather quickly that we should probably wait an extra day and just record at the normal time because there was a lot of movement today. The practice squad was finalized. There was a trade of a wide receiver who made the roster. There was a whole bunch of movement, as Richard alluded to just a second ago. So we decided to wait an extra day, and I think the podcast is going to be better for it.
Yeah, we decided after we saw Brad Holmes for the second year in a row not start the initial 53 with a full 53. That was the best move. Always keeping us and fans and whatnot on their toes.
Now you've got a dedicated listener of the show inside your house right now. Can we get Papa Silva on the podcast at some point?
I don't think so. I put him in the side room and over there, and I gave him his favorite snacks. I put something on the TV for him, and I said, "Wait here, I'll be back in an hour." So I think he's a little tied up.
Okay, all right. I just thought it'd be a good time for him to get some takes off. That's all.
No.
All right, fair enough. We'll start with some, moves that happened today because the Lions finalized their 53-man roster. Like we just said, it only had 50 players on it. We'll start with a move that happened today, and that's Tim Patrick getting traded to the Jaguars for a 6th-round pick. I think the first thing that jumps out to me, the Lions really believe in Isaac TeSlaa and his ability to hit the ground running. So what was your thoughts about that? Were you surprised at all to see that come across the transactions today?
Isaac TeSlaa was my number one takeaway from that. Like, okay, oh my goodness, they also are buying into the hype. It's not just us. And then secondly, that I think at face value, trading Tim Patrick for a 6th-rounder, I didn't love the idea of it just because I think his value even if you think Isaac TeSlaa is going to be better than him and take his spot, okay, like then you just have Tim Patrick be in the Allen Robinson role last year, and that's amazing. You'd rather have that. But, the more I think about it, I wouldn't be surprised, and we'll hear from Brad Holmes soon and potentially, get answers and get to talk to him about this. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a conversation between Patrick and the Lions, and they kind of came to an understanding. You're probably not going to get the greatest opportunity here with TeSlaa's ascent. So perhaps they asked him, would you want to go? And if so, this might be a good spot for you. So, we'll hear from Brad Holmes. But like I said, in a vacuum, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I figured that Patrick's presence, even for 1 year, would be worth more than a 6th-round pick. But then when I got to thinking about it, it made more sense.
No, and from a asset management standpoint, I think it's terrific value for them. For a guy who probably wasn't going to play, and let's be honest, his training camp wasn't all that inspiring. He definitely didn't look like the same player who had 33 catches for 394 yards and 3 touchdowns a season ago. He looked a step slow. He was battling some injuries, could hardly get out to the practice field some weeks. So ultimately, this was not a move that I think either you or I found all that surprising in the end.
No, yeah, and I think that's a great point when you talk about asset management, because when I talk about, I think he's worth more than a 6th-rounder in a vacuum, it's also important to consider the Lions signed him a year ago, got a 400-yard season, and then flipped him for a 6th-rounder. So, yes, from an asset management standpoint, yeah, I do think it went well, Tim Patrick's tenure here for the Lions.
Now we're going to be kind of jumping all across the place. Like we're probably not going to do, all the waiver cuts, all that. Cause we're going to try and structure this as like biggest / most surprising moves, which next takes us to Ahmed Hassanin. I think the edge rusher, 6th-round pick out of Boise State, rookie, suffered a pectoral injury against the Miami Dolphins. Looked like he was maybe destined for injured reserve, whether that be season-ending injured reserve or whether it be one of the coveted 8 IR to return spots. He ends up on neither. The Lions waive him with an injury settlement. He goes through the waiver wire unclaimed, and now he is a free agent. Whenever he reaches the end of that injury settlement, he'll be able to re-sign with the Lions again, but a little bit of a calculated risk on the Lions' part, and I saw a lot of people freaking out about that. That's a little bit of a complex issue. I touched on the first part of that just a second ago, but what this means to me is that the Lions were a little bit scarred, I think, from what happened with the injury situation last year, where they end up with 21 players on injured reserve at one point in December, and everything just falling apart. They used up one of their IR to return spots on Emmanuel Mosley, I believe it was, who didn't end up really being able to contribute down the stretch. Was it John Kaminsky?
Kaminsky, because E-Man came back for a little bit.
Okay. And Kaminsky didn't come back at all. Had they known what the injury situation was going to look like towards the end of the season or even midway through the season, I think in hindsight, they would have preferred to not make that move with Kaminsky, not use up one of those 8 roster spot or 8 IR to return spots on him. So I think that really played into the decision making here when it came to what to do with Ahmed Hassanin, because it would have been really easy to just put him on IR to return and then see what happens. But if you don't know if a guy is going to be back, I think coming off the season the Lions just had, it's going to be really difficult for them to feel comfortable making that decision. Now, what this means going forward is that I think there was a little bit of I call it a calculated risk. I think the Lions think that they'll be able to get him back because, I talked to his college coach, Spencer Danielson. I talked to his brother at the time that he was drafted, and everybody seemed to believe, including Ahmed Hassanin himself, that Detroit was the best spot for him. So I think they're banking on that and that connection with Ahmed and Dan Campbell and just the way that the Detroit Lions play football as the reason for to believe that he'll be back on this roster at some point when he's healed up and ready to go.
Yeah, I don't think they make this move without some level of confidence that when he is ready to return, that they will get him back. And to give a little bit more details. So yeah, it's an injury settlement, and the length of the settlement is however long Hassanin's side and the Lions think it will take him to recover. We don't know that yet. No, I haven't seen it reported anywhere. So that settlement will have to expire. And if I'm not mistaken, plus an additional 3 weeks will have to then follow. And then he is eligible to re-sign with the Lions. In the meantime, he is eligible to sign elsewhere. But again, like I said, and what you alluded to, I don't think this is a move that they make unless they have some level of confidence that, that he is going to return at some point to them. But yeah, I was surprised by this. I think mostly because I had a misunderstanding of the rule at first. I know that during the season they had 8 IR to return spots, and then on cutdown day they could use 2 and just immediately put them to IR to return instead of having to do keep them on the roster, the active roster for 24 hours and then move them. So I thought it was basically 2 on cutdown day plus an additional 8. No, it is 8 total, period. And if you use any of the 2 on cutdown day, that goes towards the 8. So like you said, they would have, instead of going into the season with a full 8, they would have been dropped down to 7. And, perhaps they're a little bit scarred from what happened last year.
Right. And at the end of the day, this is a guy that Lions fans are really excited about, a guy that I believe the Lions are excited about his long-term potential, but he's also not a guy who, if you use one of those 8 spots on him, that you can guarantee that he's going to be a contributor, even if he does get healthy in time. Say he gets healthy in week 10, for all we know, who knows when he's going to come back. But say he has half the season left when he comes back from injury. We're being super optimistic in this hypothetical. You don't know. I would say it teeters on unlikely that he's able to, from a strictly a development standpoint, injury aside, able to catch up in time enough to be a contributor on this field and actually help this team win games down the stretch and in the playoffs. So I think that was part of it too. And I also, we talk about the risk part of it. Yeah, he is free to sign with any team right now. And there were a lot of Lions fans in my mentions be like, oh my gosh, how could they do this? Yada, yada, yada. But I think what we just learned, and we learned this every year, I think, on cutdown day when you're worried about who's going to get claimed by others. Oh, Nate Lynn's for sure going to get claimed by somebody. Oh, Jackson Meek's absolutely going to get claimed by somebody. A lot of times there's just not room for these guys on another team, and other teams are making their own decisions. There's obviously some exceptions to that. Starling Thomas is a guy who a couple of years ago had a really strong training camp as a UDFA, got cut, and then next thing you know, he's playing for the Arizona Cardinals, can never get him back. So that does happen, but it happens a lot less than I think people think it does as we approach the cutdown day, because I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say it was 27 total claims that were made on the waiver wire, which is less than one per team. So yes, the Lions have an abnormally stacked roster, and perhaps you could make an argument that they have a higher probability of their players getting poached than, you know, a crappy team, a cellar dweller, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, still, in the case of Hassaning, a 6th-round pick who, yeah, he had a decent first game against the Los Angeles Chargers, but he didn't like blow the doors off anybody. And then he really kind of, the production was a little bit quieter in the next game and a half that he ended up playing. And so I just don't really see any way that there was a team watching him in preseason and being like, oh my gosh, if we have a chance to go get him, we absolutely have to do it. And his draft stock wasn't that high to begin with. So I think it's reasonable to still be excited about this player and what he can be. But at the same time, I think generally speaking, there are so many of these guys who are like on his exact equal caliber that, you know, I just don't think it's maybe as worrisome as it seems on the surface.
Right. And what you said, I think, takes us into our next point here. So there was, if my math is right, I think there's about like 1,200-ish guys, over 1,000 guys get released and waived and whatnot. Not all of them are subject to waivers. Like you said, only like 30 across the entire league got claimed, which seems to fool us every year. Like you mentioned, every year it's, oh, Nate Lynn, oh, Jackson Meeks or whatever. None of the Lions get claimed. None of the 28 players that the Lions move on from get claimed, including one Hendon Hooker, though he is not on the Lions practice squad. That was announced today.
Yeah, Hendon Hooker, the writing was kind of on the wall for him. He was released earlier. There was a report on Monday that he was going to get waived. Like I said, the writing was just kind of on the wall for him. You and I talked about it on the post-game podcast, but Dan Campbell, for the last week, has talked like a man who's over the Hendon Hooker experiment. And you know, I asked him about it after the game on Saturday, and he immediately brought up, yeah, maybe he needs a change of scenery. And I was like, okay, well, that probably says a lot, because Dan Campbell, you know, we talk about the fact that he can't lie all the time, but I do also think he does a good job of protecting his players in these press conferences and saying, and, you know, he wouldn't say that unless he really meant it and he was ready to act on what he was saying. And it turned out that was the case. And like you mentioned, they didn't even want him back in the practice squad. So I think that kind of speaks volumes about where they were at with that situation and what they believe his potential can be.
Yeah, no, he reportedly, according to the Charlotte Observer's Mike Kay, is on the way to Carolina on their practice squad. And, you know, to be clear, it could have been Hendon telling the Lions no, but based on, you know, the change of scenery comment from Campbell really did make it seem like that the Lions side was kind of ready to move on. So regardless of who it came from, he is not on this practice squad.
And I mean, you know, I don't really think a player who has performed to the level that Hendon Hooker has wields that kind of power. You know, maybe he did. Who knows? But I also don't think that like he really has the right to be like, just let me go or something like that. Like, well, I don't know.
Well,
you know,
because it's his decision. He doesn't have to sign. The Lions don't have first dibs on him. Like if he had two offers, like a Lions offer and a Panthers offer, he could.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, sure. You're probably also. I think it's more likely the case that it was probably perhaps more on the Lions end. But regardless, he's not on this roster any longer.
And another 2023 third-round pick had the same fate earlier this week. Broderick Martin, he ends up getting waived. The end of a long will they, won't they saga with him. You know, a guy who was tabbed as a developmental project coming out of the draft through his first 2 years. It was kind of like, okay, you know, I think I try to give a grace period of 2 years to those types of players, but come year 3, it's time to show something. And Broderick Martin simply just did not show enough in this preseason and training camp. He had a couple decent games rushing the passer where he was getting pressure from the interior, but by and large, he never stopped repping with the third team. He never moved up the depth chart in any meaningful way. And at the end of the day, there were a bunch of veterans who they signed off the street last year repping ahead of him for the entirety of training camp. I can't even remember a day. A lot of times in training camp, they like to mix and match guys, move them around here. Hey, this third stringer's with the second team. He's with the first team. This first stringer's going with the second team. They just like to give guys different looks. That really wasn't happening to my recall with Broderick Martin.
He was borderline really good in the preseason. I think he had something like a 16% win rate, which was almost in the top 10 of all defensive linemen that played in the preseason as a pass rusher. He flashed some of the athleticism that Brad Holmes talked about immediately after drafting him, explaining why he drafted him. But yeah, just never, like you said, I never really saw him move up the depth chart above or getting snaps in place of maybe a tired DJ Reed or even a tired Roy Lopez at nose tackle. It was just consistently repping behind those two. And even in the games when he was performing well, and there's a reason why I think he's heading to the Chiefs reportedly, their practice squad. There's a reason why that he is going in that direction, because he has shown some things, but it was consistently with the third team guys.
The third big surprising move, if you want to call it that, of the day was the Lions waived wide receiver Jackson Meeks. Touched on that a little bit earlier, but he's going back on the practice squad. And like I said, it's a reminder that other teams maybe are not as locked in to stealing your players as you think they are. And I kind of wrote this right after it was initially reported that he was waived. And, the whole thing about him being the second leading receiver in the preseason, I think a lot of people really latched onto that, but I think the production was a little bit overinflated. He had one nice catch against Atlanta that went for 68 yards. Admittedly, a really nice catch.
Almost mossed the ref.
Yeah, almost mossed the ref. So I think he had 176 yards total. Let me go find exactly what it was, because I wrote this yesterday.
A lot of it, like you said, was on that one catch against Atlanta, and then you're going to have the better numbers than me here against, was it Miami where they had
so
go ahead.
Yeah, he had the 68-yard catch against Atlanta. He had a 1-yard touchdown against Atlanta. So bam, there's one of your 2 touchdowns. Another 47 of his 176 yards. 176. Yes. Another 47 of those came on the final drive of the game against Miami, with Hooker basically just checking it down to him for 10, 12 yards on every single play, because Miami was playing the most extreme prevent defense during that drive. And that accounted for 65.3% of his production, along with that 68-yard catch. So all of this production that lofted him to the top of these preseason receiver rankings and supposedly got everybody's attention. Don't get me wrong. Would you rather him make those plays than not make those plays? Absolutely. But a lot of them were in these 2 unique situations, and he had 1 catch for 5 yards in the Chargers game, and he got completely shut out in the finale against Houston. Now, you could argue some of that is not his fault. Some of it is probably Hendon Hooker's fault, because he also was not good again, and he was getting most of the reps in that game. But regardless, I think fans saw that production and were certain that he was going to get claimed. And even you and I might have talked about it too, feeling a similar type of way. But at the end of the day, I don't think the NFL and teams at large felt the same way.
And he could still draw interest. I recall back to Isaiah Williams last year, where he starts on the active roster. The Lions move him down to the practice squad eventually, and then he does get claimed when the Bengals do have an opportunity to come take him. So there are, he can, just because he's on the practice squad now doesn't mean he's going to be for the whole season. And I say that he could also end up on the Lions roster at some point this season. I agree with what you said, that he's one of those players that we seem to have potentially overinflated his value, given the fact that nobody claimed him. But there's also still a reason why he's on the practice squad in the first place. I think it was 3 receivers, him, Tom Kennedy, and Ronnie Bell. And the Lions only have 5 now on the active roster after Patrick's trade to Jacksonville. So potentially, Tesla is that outside guy, but it's really just kind of him. And then Meeks is that second guy. I'm curious that if early in the season, if he is a candidate to be elevated from the practice squad, or if that goes to another guy, maybe like Tom Kennedy, who it's traditionally gone to.
One of the other big, we'll call it trio of transactions on cutdown day was the Lions' decision to waive Mitchell Agude, Nate Lynn, and Isaac Ukwu, all three bubble edge rushers. So like you and I, after this game, and given the injury to Hassanin, given the injury status of Josh Paschal, it seemed like a foregone conclusion that at least one of these guys, maybe two, was going to make the roster. Ultimately, Detroit just says, let's start over. Let's get these guys out the door. Only Ukwu got re-signed to the practice squad, which was surprising to me because I thought Nate Lynn not only was a front runner to win a roster spot, but I thought for sure he would have gone to the practice squad had they not decided to sign him. Of course, like you mentioned a few minutes ago, it is up to him to decide which practice squad he goes to. And maybe he's looking at this situation and saying, okay, well, they clearly don't value what I do. So maybe it's just best to go to another team and try and find your way onto a 53-man roster that way. Definitely would not be surprised if that's what he was thinking. But the takeaway from all of this is that there's still work to be done at the edge rusher position. Yeah,
they started their initial active roster had three. It was the top three with Hutch, Davenport, and Al-Quadin Muhammad, and then they signed one today, Tyrus Wheat, who played, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember off the top of my head, Tyrus Wheat was on the Cowboys for the past 2 seasons. He was a UDFA at Mississippi State. The Lions put 2 claims in on a couple players, and we know for sure they put 2 claims in on a couple players because they got those 2 players. It was Tyrese Wheat, who I mentioned, played for the Cowboys the past 2 years. Last season played 165 snaps, 14 tackles, 1 for loss, 7 pressures, and a half sack. So, rotational. And then another guy that's more of an inside presence, Tyler Lacey, who comes over from Jacksonville. The one of 2 players they got from Jacksonville today. And he had last year 25 tackles, 2 for loss, 9 pressures on 340 defensive snaps. He's more of that like big end inside 3 tech more, whereas Wheat is more so an edge guy. I would classify Wheat as edge 4 right now, which we'll get into this a little bit later. There is one open roster spot remaining. I do think it's going to be used in this position group at some point. But yeah, so they added those 2 guys through the waiver claims.
Now, credit to you, because when I was going through my final 53-man roster and I was debating Nate Lynn, Isaac Ukwu, it feels like Lynn because of the production. But you brought up that Isaac Ukwu just has a little bit more of the archetype that they like at that position.
Yeah, absolutely. He, the bigger, the stronger, the stockier. He talked about putting on weight this offseason so that he could be a better run defender. He said that this is Ukwu, that he said he remembers watching the tape of the Vikings game. It was one of the 2 games that he played in last year, Cowboys and Minnesota. And he said he just didn't love the way he set an edge. And he gained weight, and he says that he thinks he's seen it. That weight paying off in practice and the preseason games. And I think he's also just gotten stronger on his pass rush in general. That like one arm, like stab, stiff arm move that he has, that he broke out a couple times in the preseason to get after a quarterback was impressive. And then his 1 sack in the preseason. Well, he had 2 sacks, but one was taken away. But the one that counted was from the inside, almost like that, like 3 tech-ish role. I think it was more of a 4-eye, but regardless, more of an inside than edge alignment on that one. So yeah, I think perhaps that's the reason why Ukwu was kept around on the practice squad, and Lynn wasn't. Agude was not either. Another guy that I do think has that strength and that stockier build and looks like he's carved out of like titanium. But I think out of the 3, he was the least productive between Lynn, himself, and Ukwu.
Yeah, lots of Lions fans moving on here. Very disappointed to see the release of Dan Skipper, the folk hero of the Detroit Lions. He made the 53-man roster for the very first time in his career last season. Kind of felt like, this is his time. Like he's finally comfortable. He's probably going to make the team again this year. All camp long, he was repping at the 3rd offensive tackle, which with Taylor Decker out, put him on the starting unit for a lot of the summer, but ultimately the team decides to go with Jamarco Jones instead of Dan Skipper. He's ultimately brought back on the practice squad, and we're going to get to the full list of players who ended up on the practice squad in just a second. But any surprise there that they decided to go with Jamarco Jones over Dan Skipper to you?
I was significantly surprised, I'd say. And it's less about the level of player that Jamarco Jones is compared to Dan Skipper. I think, in terms of backup tackles, they're on similar footings. But just the fact that when Taylor was down for the early parts of training camp, it was Skip with the first team across from Panay. And I know Jamarco did get some reps above him in practice. I just never really felt that Skip moved off of OT3. Clearly, I was wrong, and I think clearly most of us, I don't know if anybody on the beat, to be honest with you, projected Jamarco Jones over Dan Skipper. I think we were all mistaken or all reading the situation wrong. But like he's ultimately back on the practice squad, which is a place that he's been for 7 out of his 8 seasons. So it's nothing he's not used to.
Yeah. Another thing that I wanted to get to, the Lions kept 8 defensive backs, which might sound like a lot, but if you split them up into 2 position groups, cornerback and safety, it's really not. 6 cornerbacks, 2 safeties, and no true safeties behind Maddox or behind Joseph and Branch. They obviously have Rocky Seen, who could play a little bit of safety, but is generally listed as a quarterback. And they also have Avonte Maddox, who you pointed out initially when he was signed that he was listed as a DB. So maybe they were always looking at him as a potential safety. So some versatility here, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I don't think it's a slight to the guys who didn't make the roster. But ultimately, I was a little bit surprised. They decided to cut Ian Kennelly. They decided to cut Lauren Strickland. And I think you and I, when we were talking about maybe these final roster decisions that were going to be made, it was hard to decide what to do with these guys because Lauren Strickland and Ian Kennelly had showed promise so far. But at the end of the day, when you're making these decisions to get the best 53 players onto the roster that can contend for a Super Bowl, it's hard to give in to the upside at a position like safety where you have 2 elite players already in the mix. You know, you can at the wide receiver position, you know, I think it's a little bit different. You take a Jackson Meeks and if you think that he's got upside, you can realistically see a path to him contributing regularly on the field. But at a position like safety where you have 2, maybe 3 out there at a time, it's just not really the case. Like there was no way for him to get to a starting position. So I understand that some fans may be a little bit confused by why they quote unquote ignored the upside of some of those players in the safety group. But I think ultimately at this position specifically, it was just a matter of getting the best guys who can contribute right now on the field.
It did surprise me mildly though, because I kind of, not so much Kennelly, just the fact in general that between Kennelly, between Strickland, between Mo Norris, and I know the injury, his scary injury in Atlanta kind of changed that whole situation with him. And the 4th candidate, who I can't think of right now, Eric Hallett. It's funny, you know, we go into training camp and we talk to Jim O'Neill, and he's like, "Yeah, there's 5 guys," talking about those 4 plus Dan Jackson, and there's kind of 1 spot, and one of them's got to go earn it, maybe even 2. And then Dan Jackson gets hurt, Mo Norris gets hurt, and then the final 3, they keep none of them. I was just as surprised as that, maybe a little bit less, just from a number standpoint. Like edge, I was like, okay, Lynn, Agude, Ukwu, like they're gonna keep 1, maybe 2. Safety, I was like, okay, those 5, and then when the 2 got hurt, those 3, they're gonna keep 1. I even convinced myself towards the end. I was like, man, could they like buy into the upside of Kennelly and then keep Strickland for special teams purposes? And, you know, there's only 46 or 48 active on game day. So you have some kind of developmental spots to play with. Thought maybe that would be a spot that Kennelly ended up. But I think it's like what you said, that it's just a matter of getting the best guys on the roster that you can. And the UDFA streak ends this year because of it. For the past 15 years, they've had a UDFA make this roster. Keith Cooper doesn't make the cut. Jackson Meeks doesn't make the cut. Ian Kennelly doesn't make the cut in a year that they only kept 53 on the initial, by the way, or excuse me, that they only kept 50 on the initial. So yeah, it seemed that they were really moving like a Super Bowl contender, so to speak.
Yeah, and they always talk about in the NFL, you know, the phrase is the more you can do. And when we talk about what does versatility add, coaches, GMs and stuff like that, they'll often say like, yeah, if you have a guy who can play 2 positions, you get to save a roster spot. And that's exactly what happened on the back end here, because with, you know, Maddox and Yassine, I think they're more likely, or they're more natural maybe at cornerback, whether it be outside or slot cornerback. But I think at the end of the day, they're looking at it as they have 10 guys in that position group because Yassine and Maddox can both go play safety. And since they're not necessarily going to be relied on to start, at least in the here and now, I think you can see it that way as, they got 10 guys back there instead of 8, figuratively speaking anyways.
And not only that, I mean, Branch can be one of the best nickels in the league, as we saw 2 years ago. He could play either safety spot. DJ Reed, they've talked about that in a pinch could go play slot. Amik can do the opposite and go outside. They did sign a guy today to add to that secondary, so they're not at 8 any longer. They're at 9. They brought in Daniel Thomas from who was recently cut from the Jaguars, the veteran.
The Jaguars Lions pipeline, very strong.
Yeah, no, exactly. He's more of a special teamer than a defender at this point, I think, in his career. Or I forget the exact numbers. I think over the past 3 seasons, he's played 81 defensive snaps. He's averaging just about 30-ish over the last 3. Not a guy that has been on the field much, but a really good special teamer. I think speaking about, snap averages, he's averaging like 200 and something every year the past 3 seasons. He plays punt return, kick coverage, punt coverage, field goal block. He really does it all. And, I think maybe I forgive me, I don't remember who made this point. I don't know if it was another writer or just maybe somebody on Twitter comment and a reply of one of my tweets where they said, with maybe like a guy like Tesla taking on like more offensive responsibility with Tim Patrick, maybe you do need like another like core special teamer, because I think Tesla was going to be a special teams contributor for you, and maybe that's this role that Thomas is coming into play.
I just want to say I almost had my first on podcast sneeze, but I pushed it back in. I stuffed it down.
Oh, that's great.
Gridiron gang, baby. All right, moving on. Another thing that caught my eye: Kingsley Egwakun has won the backup center job. At least it appears that way. He's the only true center to make the Lions 53-man roster behind Graham Glasgow. And when we talked about what they were going to do at offensive line, I think this was the big question mark. It seemed like it was trending this way in terms of keeping Kingsley because of the fact that Tate Ratledge doesn't really have enough experience at center. He doesn't have any experience at center, but so he certainly doesn't have enough to play that role in a pinch, given all the cerebral aspects that come with it. And we thought that they would decide to keep a true backup center on the roster because the other spots go to Giovanni Manu, they go to Jamarco Jones, they go to Coyote Awashika, who's been the next man up on that interior for a couple of years now. And outside of that, none of those 3 guys can really play center. So Kingsley ending up on the roster, especially with the injury to Tristan Colon, I think was a no-brainer. Now, one thing I am curious to know is if Kingsley, at the end of the day, is still their preferred backup, because obviously they manage the roster as if that is the case, but Colon dealt with an injury, and I think that might have played into their ability to sneak him through the waiver wire as well, but he also suffered the injury when he was starting a game ahead of Kingsley Egwakun. So I am curious to see how that shakes out as the season goes on and as Tristan Colon gets healthy, because we haven't seen him out to the practice field since he got hurt in preseason week 1 against the Atlanta Falcons.
That's exactly what I'm keeping an eye on, because the fact that Dan Campbell said that Colon was going to be down for a little bit, we thought maybe he was an IR to return candidate, and they don't go the injury settlement like they do with Hassanin. They just straight up put him on the practice squad, which leads me to believe that maybe his return is a little bit more imminent. And then they will have a decision to make between him and Kingsley. I did see Colon not practicing, like not in pads or anything like that, but working with the trainer off to the side at one of the last practices that the training camp practices that we got to see. So, a somewhat positive sign, but by no means does that mean he's ready to go back on the field tomorrow. Maybe he is, but that's not necessarily indicative of that.
Yeah, so I think that position group shook out pretty much exactly as we expected it to. Other groups that did that, running back, you could say that I'm being a liar here because there were a couple 53-man roster projections where I left Craig Reynolds off, but ultimately I ended up on the right side of history. I put him in with 4 running backs on my final 53-man roster projection. So not to toot my own horn, but I did figure that out towards the end there. That to me is interesting. Like, I do still wonder, surprising cuts happen all the time. And I ultimately think when you go into the season with 50 guys in your roster, probably wasn't ever a chance that Craig Reynolds was getting cut. But I do also wonder to some degree, how Vaki's injury situation played into what they did at that position, because he's, I think, clearly ahead of Craig Reynolds on the depth chart. He was repping ahead of him in practice. I think it was the Miami Dolphins game where he repped ahead of him in the preseason game. I could need a fact check on that. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's how I remember it. Regardless, in practice, Vaki had begun to get the second team reps before Craig Reynolds, and Craig had been that number 3 for so long. So I thought that was notable. But unfortunately for Sione Vaki, just not able to stay on the field. Looks like he's got another, aggravated hamstring injury. And I wonder at this point, like, how I feel like they should just shut him down for a little bit, because he left 3 different practices. Like, every time he left the first day of practice with a hamstring injury, like literally right away. They were still in individual groups. Left the first day of training camp with an injury, comes back like a week and a half later, practices for a couple games, then has to go, and then goes right back on the whatever you want to call it, on the sideline there with an injury, the same injury. And then it's like, okay, well, he played in the Dolphins game. Can he get back? Can he finish out strong in the preseason? He gets hurt before that game again. So, just an unfortunate run of injuries for him. And I do wonder if they're going to, like what the deal with that is. It seems prudent to maybe think about shutting him down, not for the season or anything, but just for a couple weeks at this point, and let him get fully healed with that soft tissue injury.
Especially now that, I think for a guy like him, he maybe felt a little bit of pressure to be on the field during training camp and the preseason because he was going to get a lot of opportunity. And now that the season has started, it's going to shrink to little or none with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery playing. So yeah, maybe not as much pressure to be on the field. A couple things on that. I will say, I don't know if I'm comfortable saying that he had leapfrogged Craig. On the depth chart, he was repping ahead of him, but I don't know. He was repping ahead of him for like 2 or 3 days. I don't know if that was, hey, we know what Craig is. Craig's played in the past 3 preseason games or whatever it was. Let's get Vaki some reps with the twos. It could be one or the other. But I don't think, I think the point that you made about the fact that only 50 guys made this team, the initial team, I don't think any of the 50 that were in trouble. I would say.
Yeah. Linebacker, finishing out with that position group. Exactly how we thought it would go the entire time. Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell, Derek Barnes, Grant Stewart, Zach Cunningham, and Trevor Nowaski.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that is the least surprising position group. I think it was the position group with the least amount of questions, especially after Ezekiel Turner went down with the lower leg injury in that last preseason game. If you wanted to make an argument for Ezekiel Turner because they kept 7 last year, because he's a good special teamer, because he did play well for them last year, I would have listened to you. But the fact that he got hurt, I think, made things pretty clear at that position. They're strong top to bottom. I've mentioned it before. It's not their strongest position. When you have Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph on the field at the same time at one position group, it's hard for another position to overtake that as the best. But I will say, from top to bottom, just from 1 through 6, the 2 deep, even the 3 deep, that for my money might be the deepest position. I think they are really good there.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the practice squad here. That was announced today. We've got defensive lineman Miles Adams, wide receiver Ronnie Bell, offensive lineman Tristan Colon, defensive lineman Keith Cooper Jr. He's a UDFA who I think a lot of people thought he had a decent chance of making the roster, you and I included. DB Eric Hallett, tight end Zach Horton, wide receivers Tom Kennedy and Jackson Meeks, offensive lineman Mason Miller and Michael Neese. By the way, shout out Mason Miller, because if you would have told me a week into training camp that he would end up on the practice squad, I would not have believed you. He was not good early on. He was not good in the first couple preseason games, but he really finished camp strong. And him making the practice squad, I think, is honestly speaks volumes to his growth over the course of camp. Offensive lineman Michael Neese, linebacker Anthony Pittman. Again, one of those kind of core special teamers who, maybe the decision comes down to him and Ezekiel Turner to go on the roster or to go on the practice squad if Turner doesn't suffer that injury. But ultimately, it's the local guy, Anthony Pittman, getting the shot there. Running back Jacob Sailors, who I thought had a really strong camp in preseason, flashed some in the games as well as in the practices. I think there was one day where it was like, yep, Jahmyr Gibbs and Jacob Sailors, the only running backs who can do anything today. So, I think that's a good move there. Safety Lauren Strickland, offensive lineman Dan Skipper, and edge Isaac Ukwu. Couple notes here. No QB3 on the roster. No Nate Lynn, like we mentioned. No Ian Kennelly, like we mentioned. And no Nick Whiteside. Cornerback, Auburn Hills guy, went to Saginaw Valley, had a really strong training camp, but over the course of the last, call it week and a half, really just kind of the production took a little bit of a nosedive and just wasn't able to do enough to find his way into the roster.
Yeah, there is one more spot available, so we'll see if one of those guys maybe takes a look around elsewhere, sees what offers they have, and then comes back. But I will say the fact that they don't have a QB3 on this practice squad leads me to believe that spot is being reserved for a QB3 because you need a third arm usually in practice.
Well, and you need a third brain. That's what I think is interesting. Is somebody asked me, they were like, "Oh, who do you think they're going to go get?" And I was like, "I don't really know." Like their play is not necessarily all that indicative of who you're going to get. Of course, you want a competent guy in there in the event that you need to use that emergency third quarterback or whatever it is. But the primary job of the quarterback 3 is to basically be Jared Goff's study buddy. So you need a really, I would say, a quarterback with above average smarts who sees the game in a similar type of way. And it might not just be, at least how the Lions do it, as simple as, hey, that guy's got a little bit of upside, or that guy played before, let's just go get him. It's a little bit more detailed than that, and under the surface, if you will.
Right.
So, lastly, we got 2 more things here for you real quick. We mentioned only 52 players on the active roster. It's a Darius Smith time, right? This is what the people pay to see. We teased you all 40 minutes long. We're finally getting the Zadarius Smith talk. You and I have talked over the last couple of weeks, and it feels like every week that we've talked,
it feels like over the years.
It's gone up 5. Yeah, right. It's gone up 5-10%. I think when we talked on the last podcast, it was 60-40. I'm at 70-30 after the roster moves that they made to only keep 3 edge rushers at that position. I'm unmoved on the whole with the guy they brought in, Wheat, in terms of his ability to make a significant impact and be that kind of good, let's call it first or second string type of player. So I think it's a Darius Smith time. What say you, Richard Silva?
There's 2 reasons why I agree that I'm leaning more likely than not at this point. One, the fact that, as you said, they kept 3 and now are at 4 edge rushers. And then also, I just keep remembering back to that Brad Holmes interview in 97-1 where, I'm paraphrasing, he basically says, yeah, man, we've been in touch, and, if he wants to miss training camp, he's a veteran. He kind of just implied, yeah, we'll talk soon.
Yeah.
So those 2 things combined does lead me to believe that it could be Zadarius Smith Lions reunion time. There are a few others out there that competent edge rushers that have shown veteran edge rushers that have shown capable, but I think Zadarius is the best, and the connection between him and Detroit is clear.
And the Brad Holmes comment that I keep coming back to, at least in terms of maybe not necessarily proof that they're going to sign Zadarius Smith, but proof that they need to do something impactful, is when he was talking about trading for Zadarius Smith at the deadline last year. And he's like, you guys have no idea how hard it is to go get an edge rusher who can contribute, because there's not a lot of good ones out there. And when teams have a good one, they don't want to give him up. And so it kind of sounds like he went to hell and back to make that acquisition happen. And I just don't foresee a world, and maybe I'm wrong. There's been a little bit of tension between Brad Holmes and the edge rusher position in terms of his willingness to talk about it or whatever. So maybe this is still way more important to us than it is to him. But when I think about the difficulty that he went through to make that happen, it seems like it would be unwise to go into the season with the situation the way it is, knowing that if one thing goes wrong, you're going to have to add somebody on the fly. And, Aiden Hutchinson being able to cover up some of those deficiencies is going to go a long way. And maybe he might reach a point where he doesn't think he needs to go out and get somebody like a Zadarius Smith if Marcus Davenport suffers an injury or something along those lines. But Yeah, it feels like it's time to go.
Something I did think of today, which I'm still leaning more towards likely than not, but I don't know what the number is for Za'Darius. It could be, I would assume whatever deal it is, it's going to be with incentives because he's going to be, if all goes well and Davenport stays healthy, he's going to be on the field on third downs to get after the pass or whatever. Maybe there'll be some snap-based incentives. Maybe there'll be some sack-based incentives, pressures, and all that stuff. But if it's, let's call it $5 million it takes to bring Za'Darius back, that's going to be the cap hit. When Kyle Hamilton got that deal today, which for the record was 4 years, $100.4 million per Schefter with $82 million guaranteed. To put that into perspective, $82 million guaranteed, Kirby Joseph's entire deal was $85 million guaranteed. Not guaranteed. It was just $85 million entire deal was worth, and the guarantees, I believe, were somewhere in the mid to high 30s. Kyle Hamilton got $82 million guaranteed.
Yeah.
I bring that up to say Kyle Hamilton seems to be the Brian Branch comparison. You know what I mean? And maybe Branch isn't going to get that. Kyle Hamilton's a multi-time All-Pro, but he's going to get near it. And I would assume the Lions are going to want to bring him back. And we've talked about this before. The edge market has exploded. Hutch is going to get whatever it's going to be, $45 million. Branch is going to get maybe just under 25. Kirby already got his. Jack Campbell is going to get paid at some point. JMO, they got to see what they decide to do with him. So we talk about $5 million. It's like, oh, that's only a small portion of the cap this year. But maybe they really need that for the rollover. You know what I mean? To increase your cap for years going forward. That's one thing that I just am thinking about for when I am thinking about adding a guy like Za'Darius Smith. That's the one reason I could see it not happening.
For sure. No, and I completely agree with you. I just think that you're at a point right now where you got to go for it. You got to be thinking about this. And I understand and I respect the attention is so much on next year and beyond. But at a certain point, I don't know. You got an opportunity.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree because, like you said, they're one wrong thing away from kind of, I don't know if disaster is the right word, but borderline there.
And I agree with you. Like, every penny counts at this stage, and $5 million is nothing to shake a stick at. But, like, assuming that Branch matches the Hamilton contract, it gets you saving the $5 million gets you 25% of the way to covering one of his years of salary. I don't know. That's a tough one for me, especially as impactful as Za'Darius Smith can be. He was tied for 6th amongst all players in the league in pressure since coming over in the trade last year in weeks 11 to 18, and he had 4 sacks to boot. And I can just only imagine what he's going to be able to do. You don't even really have to imagine it because we saw what he looked like opposite of Myles Garrett, but playing opposite of Aiden Hutchinson and maybe taking the field at the same time as Marcus Davenport, because he did do a lot of moving around last year and he kind of proved that he can rush from the inside when necessary. I don't know.
Imagine the three of them on the field together on like 3rd and 13.
Yeah, with Aleem in the middle when he comes back.
Yeah.
Woo!
Yeah,
that's how you win. That's how you win playoff football games. Just saying. Last bit of news we got to get to. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce got engaged. Just kidding. But one of Travis Kelce's teammates, wide receiver Rashee Rice, he was officially suspended today. There was he ran into some legal trouble. I think it was last offseason. There was some sort of hit and run, but ultimately he gets a 6-game suspension. A lot of people thought it was going to be a 3-game suspension. It ends up being 6, and the Lions play the Chiefs in week 6. So he's officially been ruled out for that contest, which is a big deal. He's their top receiver, top target for Patrick Mahomes, and him not playing is a factor.
Yeah, I'd say he's one of the more underrated receivers in the NFL right now. He is good, and he is their top pass catcher. So that is very notable.
Nothing on Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift.
I'm happy for him. I hope they have a long, happy marriage.
All right, we're gonna finish things out with a blind ranking. Thanks for hanging out with us today. Talking about the news. We're gonna end this day on a little bit of fun. If you missed last week's show, Richard and I have started a new end of show game where we started with Connect 4. We moved on to, what was the game that stunk?
Like guess who, basically.
Guess who? Yeah, we moved on to guess who. That didn't last very long. So now we're on blind rankings. Richard brought a really good one to the table last week with wide receivers. I thought it was a good mix of wide receivers. I was a little bit under the gun this week. I got to be honest. We were dealing with a lot over here at DetroitNews.com. So I'm interested to see, I'm interested to see where you go with this because you're going to be blind ranking running backs who have been with the team in the last 10 years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Last 11 years, maybe we'll call it.
Okay.
So that is your criteria. Running backs from at least 2014 and maybe a little bit later. I can look it up right now if it matters to you.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Decade-ish.
Decade-ish. Let's see. Yeah, last 11 years. So we're going to start. We're going to do running backs. We're going to start with one Jahmyr Gibbs.
So I think me and you are equally high on Jahmyr Gibbs. I've called him a Hall of Fame talent before, and I think that's obvious. Like, yeah. I really think he is.
By the way, if you don't know, real quick, if you don't know what a blind ranking is, because we should probably explain this. This is like a TikTok thing that the kids are doing these days on Snapface and Book Chat and stuff like that. So basically, I'm going to give Richard 5 running backs. He has no idea who the running backs are going to be, and he's got to attempt to rank them 1 through 5 without knowing who's coming next. So, anyways,
right. Maybe I'm nuts. Maybe I am. I'm putting Jahmyr Gibbs at 1.
Okay. All right. Jahmyr Gibbs at 1. The next player, Reggie Bush.
Reggie Bush. And we talked about this last week. I'm ranking them kind of,
in the prime.
Based on my own criteria. I'm not really taking into account USC Reggie Bush here.
Right.
I'm comparing Lions.
His 2 seasons with the Lions.
Right. It's 3 or 4.
Okay.
I am going to put Reggie Bush at 4, but I don't feel great about it only because he played 2 seasons. And I know Jahmyr Gibbs has only also played 2 seasons, but continue.
Your third player is Adrian Peterson. Detroit Lions Adrian Peterson.
Right.
Which is not the Adrian Peterson that you're thinking of.
No. I'm going to put Adrian Peterson at 5. Just, again, Detroit Lions Adrian Peterson.
Listen, I don't want to give anything away, but that's a good decision. DeAndre Swift is your 4th option.
Okay, so it's between 2 and 3. Who would I have in the past 11 years-ish above DeAndre Swift? David Montgomery. And that might be, I might be forgetting someone off the top of my head, and there might be someone screaming at me right now that's listening. And I do think you would put David Montgomery on this list. But that's a gamble because there's only one guy that I would put above him. But I'm going to bet that you did that. So I'm going to say DeAndre Swift at 3.
Bet lost, brother. Your final choice is Jamal Williams. He's going to number 2.
Hey, actually, I don't hate it.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad.
By the way, did I say DeAndre Smith? I meant DeAndre Swift.
I mean, I would definitely swap them if given the opportunity, but I think for the most part, Reggie Bush is a little bit low. I'll be honest. Reggie Bush is a little bit low.
Sure.
His second season in Detroit was not all that great, but his first season in Detroit, he was the Lions' first 1,000-yard rusher in I think of my lifetime, since Barry retired.
Absolutely.
So Reggie Bush probably needs to be a little bit higher, but ultimately I think so you got Jahmyr Gibbs 1, Jamal Williams 2, DeAndre Swift at 3, Reggie Bush at 4, and Adrian Peterson, Lions Adrian Peterson at number 5.
So I think I feel really good at Gibbs at 1 and Peterson at 5.
Yeah.
That middle bunch. I think, honestly, I like Jamal Williams maybe the best out of all of them.
No.
What do you mean no?
I think you swap.
No, he also had 2 seasons. One that was, I don't even want to say underwhelming. He ran for 600 yards. That's more than Bush had in their quote unquote underwhelming seasons. And then they both just broke 1,000 by some change. And Jamal Williams had 17 touchdowns one year.
That's different though. That's different. Jamal Williams had, he had more in front of him. He had more in front of him.
Yeah, that's sure. I think I'm comfortable Jamal Williams there, and I think
I think that is reasonable. I think it's reasonable to be comfortable with that.
I think the conversation is DeAndre Swift, Reggie Bush, and you know what? That's a matter of preference. So I feel good. I feel good about what I did.
Okay. All right. Well, fair enough. All right. That should do it for this show. If you haven't liked the show already, please do so. Please subscribe. Please give us 5 stars. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your significant other, play it in the car with your significant other. That is something that my wife loves, is when I play sports podcasts in the car. So you should try that at home as well. But Richard, if you don't have anything else, I think we ought to tell the people goodbye, and we'll be talking to Brad Holmes tomorrow and seeing what he says about all these decisions. So check it out at DetroitNews.com.